Our next one is titled Husband Thinks Women Overreact During Childbirth. I'm a week away from my due date, and I've gradually become more and more disappointed with my husband over him not wanting to be involved in my pregnancy, not doing any research, and not remembering any important details said during our doctor visits. Not only that, he hasn't shown much empathy during the times I've had uncomfortable symptoms like nausea, swelling, etc. Last night, I was watching childbirth videos on YouTube, and I decided to show the ones that I was watching to my husband. The woman in the video started crying out in pain while pushing, and my husband rolled his eyes and started laughing. He said, "That woman is obnoxious, can't be that painful, and she shouldn't be screaming." He continued to laugh at the video, and I asked why he thought it was funny, and he said, "I'm laughing because that's gonna be you." I got so upset. I tried to convince him that it can be really painful and that I feel awful knowing that if I show signs of being in pain or uncomfortable, that he's either going to think that I'm overreacting or that my suffering is laughable. He managed to turn it around and make the argument my fault. He called me a dumb and threatened to leave me last night. It's the next morning now and he refuses to apologize. He's still playing victim, and I heard him saying that he wants to shoot himself because he can't stand me. I don't know what to do. I'm a week away from my induction, and it's not like I'm in a position to leave or make any big changes or decisions right now. I definitely want to cry at the idea of him being in the delivery room with me, but of course he's my husband and he can't miss the birth of his child, but I just don't want him there with me anymore. Last thing I want is someone who won't give me the support I need. Now, obviously the husband in this situation is kind of a little bit of a dick. He's not a very nice person. He's not treating her in a very nice way. The part that he says he wants to shoot himself because he can't stand her, like these are comments that are just completely unacceptable in any type of fight in a married couple. So definitely he's way overboard here in a way that's really insulting and not good. The part with the childbirth videos, his reaction, honestly, I would say that in the majority of cases, this type of reaction is really a symptom of how removed we are as a society from the experience of birth. Breastfeeding also falls under this. You may have heard me say that before. In general, I think what's happened with us is that we just have no understanding or perception or contact with or exposure to these types of animalistic experiences that we have still. And birth is the prime example of that, where I'd argue actually it's one of the most animalistic and primal experiences that a woman can, well, it's definitely the most that a woman can go through, but also one of the most that any person can go through. And it's one of those times, experiencing birth is one of those times where you realize that you're just a mammal in a lot of ways, like all the other mammals. So that he reacts in this way and that he thinks it's funny, that it seems foreign to him. I think a lot of people try to laugh things off that make them uncomfortable. And I would question if maybe he felt a little bit uncomfortable watching it. And that's part of where the reaction came from. This is obviously me reaching, like this is pure speculation. I don't know anything about him. And he does seem kind of like not the nicest of people in general. So maybe he did genuinely find it funny. But I think most people watch birth videos and feel a little bit uncomfortable. There's something about it that's just, you're just like, this is strange. And I think that comes from us just really not having experienced it or not seen it. The way that it's presented in like media, so in TV shows and things like that, it's always very sanitized. And yes, women scream a lot, but that's about it. Otherwise, you just don't get quite the nitty-gritty details in the same way that you would if you were watching childbirth videos on YouTube, for example, which in my experience are a lot more real and a lot more honest about what it's like as an experience. All that said, she is, in my opinion, trying to involve him a little bit too much. So everything from that he doesn't want to be involved in her pregnancy, he doesn't do any research, he doesn't remember details during doctor visits. Empathy does sound like a bit of a problem, but I guess that depends on how that manifests itself. In general, it sounds to me like she's experiencing this maybe for the first time, and it's a really big deal, and it really consumes you actually, especially during early pregnancy and late pregnancy. Say those two periods You really invest a lot of energy and time just kind of educating yourself about what pregnancy looks like. At least I did. And especially the first few weeks after I found out that I was pregnant, I felt like I just consumed a lot of content around pregnancy. So I would have an idea of what to expect and how the experience would be for me. And I also had a similar experience in terms of, obviously my husband didn't do any of that because to him it's a very, like, why would he need to? When it comes to things like important details, like, yes, I would tell him something and then a couple of weeks later I tell him the same thing again because he'd forget it. So it's normal to me that men just don't have that same connection to pregnancy that women have, of course, because women are going through it, whereas men are not. So that part, I honestly wouldn't have been too annoyed at him for it. I think I showed my husband only childbirth videos that I felt were a little bit funny. Otherwise, I watched a lot of birthing videos all by myself, and I didn't involve him in that either. And honestly, I think that that's just part of, like, I don't know that very many men are super interested in what birth looks like as an experience. Traditionally, birth used to be something that only women were involved in, so men wouldn't even be in the room when it happened. They would come in after the baby was born. And not that I'm saying that men shouldn't be present during the birth of their child, because I think that's actually really awesome when they're there. But I just think that maybe this is part, like, just not understanding the disconnect that men go through, I think is part of the conflict that might happen if this is an expectation that you have in your relationship and you're finding that your spouse is just really not that interested. I'd say that this is pretty normal. There's that part to it, and then the rest of it, I think, is just clear that he was not a very good partner throughout that argument. She does say that my impression is that the argument really exploded and went completely out of bounds. So when she says, I got so upset, she tried to convince him that it can be really painful. And then she just jumps to, he managed to turn it around and make the argument my fault. He threatened to leave me last night. Like, that sounds to me like there was a very big gap between those two events, that something happened there in the argument where it completely escalated. All that said, I don't think that threatening to leave is ever acceptable in an argument. And I think statements like he wants to shoot himself are also completely out of line. This is not... I think it's hard for people to learn how to argue with each other when they're married, and there is a temptation to look for the thing to say that's going to be the most hurtful and the most emotional, and just kind of get out your anger and to, like, dig it into the other person. And obviously, this is not great for a marriage in general. I think one of the good things to keep in mind is to try to only say things that you actually truly deeply mean, and not only mean in the moment, but that when you're not so angry anymore and you're not so pissed off, you're still going to mean it. The things that you can stand behind. And then usually statements like this are ones that people just regret after the fact. So maybe don't say things that you're going to regret or that make you look like a terrible person or that have the risk of escalating a situation beyond the point that you want. All that said, I would probably choose to not have him present at my birth. When it comes to my particular birth and my personal experience of it, I essentially told my husband exactly what I wanted him to do. I had very specific expectations towards him. And yeah, I think that we agreed on these things in advance. In general, I think that giving birth makes you very vulnerable as a woman. And yes, you should have a support person present, but that should be someone that you absolutely trust, that can advocate for you as needed, that will not make you feel uncomfortable. Like, giving birth is one of the most freeing in some ways, because you just don't have the energy to care about being self-conscious in any way whatsoever. And so if you have someone there who makes you feel self-conscious on top of the experience of birth already, which is a really intense one, then that's not going to be good for you. You want to remove any sources of stress from your immediate vicinity when you're giving birth, because the more stressed you are, the more painful of a birth you're going to have. So I would probably not have him present at the birth, and yeah, like, maybe he would be able, like, we'd be able to resolve the argument afterwards, and maybe he would apologize, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, I can let it go, and we'll give it a shot. And then I would still probably tell my midwife or whatever, hey, if he says A, B, C, D, or if it seems like I'm uncomfortable, please, can you make sure that I get my space? And I think that would actually be quite fair. I would even tell him that directly as well, because there are these moments in life, and birth is one of those, that you just have to treat as though they're very sacred and they're very special. And if you treat them that way, then chances are you're going to have a better birth than otherwise. So yeah, really tough situation, really tough circumstance. I feel absolutely sorry for her. Now, the comments are a ton of people who go on, just hop on about how extremely painful birth is and all the different ways that you can convince him that birth is the most painful thing that you could ever. So this comment says, childbirth is the equivalent of breaking 26 bones at once. So break 26 of his bones and see if he's obnoxious. Both times I gave birth, my husband sobbed due to the pain that I was in, and I had fantastic epidurals. Honestly, leave him. He's a loser. I would say, if you can't stand me, then go. I don't need you. Now, I don't know where the statement comes from in terms of birth is the equivalent of breaking 26 bones at once. I found it extremely difficult to describe what giving birth is like, especially, people would say, okay, well, what is it like breaking a bone? And honestly, I don't think it's anything like any other type of pain that you might experience. So this is just not where I would go in order to help this woman, because I don't think that that's very helpful. But there we are. This person says, girl, if my husband acted like that, my midwife would have knocked him out before I could. Honestly, if he acts like that in the delivery room, your provider might kick him out anyways. Take him right out of the equation. No support is better than negativity. Tell him you'd like to kick him in the balls 10 times in a row, and then he can tell you it's not painful. Then she talks about getting an epidural. And OP replies to this. She says, thank you. It's nice of you to say. I'll try my best to stay positive. Before, during, and after. It's nice to know that my provider could make him leave if he starts behaving this way, but honestly, I know that he won't. He's very good at playing the perfect husband when people are around. He's only like this when it's just us. And it's funny that you said to tell him I'd want to kick him in the balls 10 times in a row and see if that hurts. He's totally one of those guys that say getting kicked in the balls once is the equivalent or worse than childbirth. This part I just wanted to highlight in terms of when she says he's very good at playing the perfect husband when people are around and he's only like this when it's just us. That's actually a huge red flag. That's quite terrifying. People who behave in a completely different way when they're around other people versus how they behave in their relationship are, generally speaking, let's say, highly likely to be abusive, at the very least emotionally abusive in some kind of way. So this is quite scary to me. This would say to me that I really don't want him present, because I wouldn't be able to trust him when I'm with him, because he behaves as if he's a different person, and that's quite terrifying. Another comment from this thread that I wanted to read out, she says, honestly, I agree with the majority stating that he should be out of the delivery room. However, I would literally have a conversation with him saying that because you're acting like crap and cannot support me in my most vulnerable state of giving birth to your child, you will not be there. Furthermore, I do not know if I want to be with you, seeing that you lack empathy and fail to recognize something so big that I'm going through or about to go through. I do not know what has caused you to have such a messed up perspective of reality, but you clearly need help. Seeing as I am almost near my labor, I cannot make any life-changing decisions right now. After the baby is born, I will have to address the continuation of our relationship. Now, beyond the fact that it's kind of hilarious how formal she wrote this, I will have to address the continuation of our relationship. I think that you should actually sit down and have a serious conversation about it. There are some times when men, I think, make jokes at times that are just completely inappropriate. And for example, during birth is one of those times. I think my husband said something about how he would make some type of joke while I was giving birth. And I was like, no, it's just not the right time. Okay. There's a time and place for everything. This is not the right time for that. But I don't know that I would say, hey, let's throw away the whole relationship on the basis of this one argument. On the basis of everything else, like if it's normal for him to treat her like crap in person and then act like a completely different person around other people, if it's normal for him to say things like, I would rather shoot myself than be with you, if these are, if this was not an isolated event, but characteristic of their relationship, then you have really serious major problems in your relationship. And I would hope that most people who have that kind of experience can recognize that this is not normal. This is not what a relationship should look like. This is not what arguments should look like, and can act accordingly based on that knowledge. OP replies to this one. She says, thank you for the comment and what you suggested. I hope I'll be able to address everything without him tuning me out and just waiting for his turn to speak. He did apologize today, but he also said that he just thinks the woman was being obnoxious. If I screamed out in pain, that he wouldn't laugh at me. It doesn't make sense to me, but it somehow does to him. That actually does kind of make a bit of sense to me. I think that having empathy to someone that you actually know and care about and have a relationship with is very different from having empathy for someone else. And sometimes, you know, like I said, I showed birth videos to my husband that I thought were funny because I thought that the people present, not the woman giving birth, but the people present helping her said things that just completely... I just thought they were really awkward and sounded terrible, and I was like, you're not allowed to say anything like this to me, otherwise it would drive me crazy. So to some element I understand seeing a video and being like, what an obnoxious human being, and saying that you would treat your wife differently to that. All that said, it still sounds very red flaggy, so who knows. In general, I think that, like, to summarize, this idea that men are equally as interested in pregnancy and birth as women are is just a lie, and just don't convince yourself of that. Your husband is never going to have the same level of interest as you do, and therefore, you know, it's fine to share, of course, and you want to share most things that go on in your life, but it's also okay to not expect him to be super hyper enthusiastic about it all the time. Don't laugh at people who are giving birth. That's not cool. And maybe don't laugh at people who are giving birth right before your wife is about to give birth either. That's like doubly not cool. Saying specific things during arguments is completely out of line, and you should control that. And my final point is, watch out for red flags in your relationship. If you feel like you're being treated badly, and that's a really genuine feeling, then you need some kind of, like, that's really something that you need to work through somehow productively, rather than trying to excuse things in your head and let it go. Some statements are just absolutely no-goes in a relationship.